Good morning. Today we are going to talk about bird species identification using deep learning algorithms. For this very interesting subject, I'll be walking through a set of topics that describes the problem statement that we have at hand, existing research works and methodologies used previously to overcome this challenge, and the approach that we are going to study. Then we'll evaluate our proposed approach and how it performed in comparison to the data we chose and the previous studies we researched on. And finally, I'll talk about what we learned from the whole process and some future work that can be built up on our study. So let's start. So, as we know, we have an abundance of flora and fauna in the world, where the birds are also a major part of our ecosystem. Today, there are more than 10,000 species of birds present across the globe. We identify these species by their slightest variation in size, form, shape, color patterns, wings, their habitats, and even their sound calls. Now, given these enormous volume of features, it would be difficult for any one single person to identify all the species correctly without any assistance. And usually, these assistants come in the forms of handbooks and picture guides or audio guides. I myself had the opportunity to interact with some renowned ornithologists who gave me insightful information of the importance of birds in our ecosystem and the lack of that information amongst the common man, which in fact enthused me to become an avid bird watcher myself. And with that in mind, I chose this topic to identify the bird species using deep learning algorithms, which will not only give me a chance to develop a platform and understand the algorithms such as neural networks and deep learning algorithms, but also to develop a platform which will cater to a larger population, including but not limited to researchers, ornithologists, budding bird watchers, and further use that platform to create awareness of the importance of birds and do our bit, however small or large, in protecting them in our ecosystem. Now, we talk about the existing work that has been done in this field. Definitely, there have been bird classification tools and application that has been in the center for many researchers to identify the species correctly and create awareness about the different species of the birds and their importance in the ecosystem. Many of these researchers have focused on the process of identifying birds with the use of machine learning algorithms applied to different forms of data, including features, audio, video, and images. Existing bird classification models use deep learning, where artificial human inspired neural networks and algorithms learn from an enormous volume of data. We'll discuss some of these approaches in short, which are identification based on audio data using CNN framework, which classified birds based on their audio call. The major drawback of this model was the presence of noises in the data that can be attributed to natural sounds of other birds, fauna, insects, or other objects, even human interferences. Another approach identified birds based on color features, where features were extracted from unconstrained images to classify birds using color segmentation algorithms. It computed histogram bins. The major drawback for this one was that many species had similar color features and patterns that resulted in the model misclassifying them. Researchers also researched classifying the bird species based on DNA barcoding from the DNA collected from hair, blood, feces of birds. Although the results were useful, the benefits were only limited to the scientific community, as the instruments or the data required for sampling are not available to the common man or avid bird watchers like myself. Apart from deep learning algorithm, feature extraction and dimensionality reduction techniques were also used to classify birds, which use the ratio of distance between the eye and the base of the beak, as well as the distance between the breadth of the beak. SVM and KNN algorithms were used, where SVM gave 84% accuracy, while KNN scored about 67%. Another deep learning approach was to use pose normalized CNN on images, where pose locates and normalizes to find the features. It resulted in an accuracy level between 65 to 75%. With these background researches available, we move to our proposed approach, that is, to use a convolutional neural network using PyTorch on the dataset obtained that contains 200 bird species. The CNN algorithm will use a ResNet 18 pre-trained model for our classification using a 2D convolutional layer. Briefly, we will now talk about the dataset, the model architecture, algorithm design, hyperparameter tuning, how the model classifies the birds, and finally we'll evaluate the model and give a code walkthrough. For the dataset, we used a Caltech UCSD Birds 200 called CUB 200 2011 dataset, which included 11,788 images of 200 bird species with 15 part locations, 312 binary attributes, and one bounding box. In the process of data visualization, we develop a general understanding of the data and check to ways to impute the data if required to increase the number of images available for training the data. We'll be using a convolutional neural network algorithm to train on the 200 species from the Caltech UCSD bird dataset. So CNN has two main components, feature extraction and classification. It consists of four layers: the convolutional layer, extracting visual features. It has each neuron is only connected to a small number of neurons in the previous layer. The activation layer, to compress values into ranges. It defines how the weighted sum of input is transformed into the output from a node or number of nodes in the layer. The pooling layer reduces the number of neurons, that is, the size of the feature maps, which makes the computation faster as training parameters are reduced. And the fully connected layer, in which it connects every neuron from one layer to every neuron in another layer. The proposed algorithm uses a conv 2D class from PyTorch as the 2D convolutional layer. A matrix of kernel of weights slides over the 2D data and performs element-wise multiplication on the current input data in the kernel. The result is then summed into a single output pixel. For our dataset, as the images consist of RGB values, the 2D convolution occurs individually for each of the three color channels, and respective results are added together to obtain the final output. The algorithm uses a ResNet 18 pre-trained model from PyTorch for training the model and classifying the images. PyTorch is a framework based on the Torch library developed by Facebook's AI Research Lab, which is open source. ResNet 18 framework has 18 deep layers and uses the activation function ReLU, that is the rectified linear unit, and batch normalization. We use 20 epochs, 256 batch size, and Adam optimizer with a learning rate of 0.001 to obtain a higher accuracy and a better trained model classification. The training model is now fed the dataset to classify the bird species, which follows the process of taking into account multiple features such as shape, size, body color, patterns, and beak patterns. Then features are extracted from multiple layers of the network by deep networks of conventions, and the aggregated classification characteristics are transferred to the classifier, and the result is the identified species. Now we obtain the overall performance and validation accuracy of our trained model and plot the accuracy and loss versus number of epochs graph using matplotlib library. From these graphs, we can say that our model does not overfit or underfit the data and has a good generalization gap. However, the generalization gap could have been smaller given that we had more data to train the model on. We finally test our model on our test dataset and obtain an accuracy of 94.06%, which, when compared to the existing researchers, is a good accuracy that we set to achieve. With that, we successfully conclude that we developed and trained a classifier model to predict bird species, which classifies at with an accuracy of 94.06%. We used Python and explored different libraries like PyTorch and Matplotlib and used deep learning algorithm for our purpose of bird class image classification. We used COB 200 2011 dataset that included 200 species with 11,788 images, totaling various characteristics such as shape, size, color, pattern, and beaks and wings. We also compared existing researches done to classify birds based on different types of data, including images, using different frameworks and algorithms. Not only that, this whole process not only enabled me to practically implement and understand the concepts of pattern recognition and machine learning learned in the class, but also broadened the horizon of knowledge in the field of ornithology, environmental sciences, and how technology can play its part in protecting the elements of nature. Some future works that can be built up on the work that we did is comprehensive data set of the species from around the world to train more accurate model to help identify different mutations occurring in the existing species or new species because of climate and ecosystem change, and a graphical user interface model for researchers and avid bird watchers to increase their ease of use. The penultimate aim of the project is to create awareness and protect the rare, endangered, and threatened species and understand their biotic component in the environment and do our bit in saving the environment and its element. Thank you.